So just to share briefly, this is going to be a follow-up video to a previous video called Buddhism Q&A Series 2, number 28. And the sense in which it's a follow-up is that that video expressed a dialogue between myself and one of my friends and subscribers on my channel, and this video represents a continuation of that same dialogue. That one was called Starting Shinshu Practice and Self-Judgment, and I think I may entitle this one something to the effect of transitioning from self-power to other power, because that in essence is the sort of the theme or the overarching kind of narrative, I think, that's associated with this dialogue. But I think you'll find the questioner's comments and questions to be quite interesting, intriguing, and thoughtful. And hopefully in my responses I've given something that makes halfway sense in terms of a reply. But the way I'm going to do this so that it becomes clear as to who's talking when is that I am going to actually recite my subscribers' questions and comments, and then I'm going to ask Charlotte, my significant other, to recite my replies. So with that brief introduction, hopefully this will be something that's reasonably easy to follow, and I hope you enjoy it. Thank you. One other point I would make before I begin creating a video with an extension of this dialogue from that previous Buddhism Q&A Series 2, number 28, is that I haven't included the entire content of this dialogue on an unabridged basis. In other words, I've pulled only certain phrases and sentences and sections, so that if you want to read the whole thing, you would need to actually go back to that previous video. And then you can read it down in the comments section. But again, the parts that I've emphasized here are the parts that relate to this evolution from self-power to other power. And in that dialogue, Xavier says, "In the time since I initially asked these questions, I furthered my studies and explored a more intellectual school, thinking that I would find answers there. I read a lot of books, joined a sangha, and studied under a teacher for a while. Initially, I was drawn to this school because of its rigorous practices and studies. I thought that I would be assured of success because of its wealth of knowledge and materials. In hindsight, I was mistaken in the belief that I could think or learn my way to a spiritual practice. Many other people found success with this tradition, so I thought I would too. But it is clear to me now that spirituality can only be expressed on an experiential basis. I read a lot, but it never felt natural. Some of the broader Mahayana teachings I picked up helped me philosophically, albeit superficially. The more I tried to analyze my mind and unpack different concepts, the more tied up in concepts I became. Toward the end of this experiment, I found myself missing Pure Land practices a lot. Naturally, I went back and studied more, and I've found myself more receptive to it now." This quote I read from D.T. Suzuki was really illuminating. Quote, "We realize the inefficacy of self-power only when we try to make use of it and are made aware of its worthlessness. Other power is all important, but this truth is known only by those who have striven by means of self-power to attempt the impossible." Close quote. He went on to clarify, quote, "Therefore, striving is a prerequisite of any realization. Spiritually speaking, everything is finally from Amida, but we must always remember that we are relative beings. As such, we cannot understand things unless we first try to do our best on this plane of relativity." Close quote. I still have doubts and confusion, but I feel more secure in trusting myself to Amida in the face of the unknown, if only for the fact that I've realized there is no other option for me.
John replied, "It sounds like you have continued a diligent search for a path that resonates with you. As may be the case for any true seeker such as yourself, there are often paths we must tread before we diverge onto another way that may be more appropriate for our spiritual needs. I don't think you can be faulted at all for pursuing what seems right at the time, even if in retrospect you may come to a different conclusion. In my view, you came to an important insight in realizing that concepts could take you only so far, as sublime and profound as those might be, which they definitely are in the Mahayana tradition. In looking towards someone further along the path, Suzuki, for me, has also been a great source of wisdom. I heartily believe in the quote you shared, and it is that understanding that motivates me to upload a broad range of self-power teachings, in spite of the fact that I myself have found comfort and peace with an other power tradition.
Then in the next section, Xavier replied, I am interested in your statement about how you share self-power teachings. I am struggling coming back to Pure Land from self-power practices. I have at least a small amount of faith which motivated me to return and begin chanting Nembutsu again. But I am struggling to feel at rest in the Nembutsu. The school I studied, as I said, was pretty intense. There are lots of different levels, tiers, prayers, contemplations, analyses, etc., etc. It was not fit for me. But to come back to just chanting the Nembutsu feels a bit lackluster after being exposed to all the different ways other Buddhists investigate their minds and emotions to achieve peace for themselves and others. Leaving such a structured methodology of practice to something like the Nembutsu feels sort of aimless, and I am not sure how to ground myself in it. Especially if we take into account Shinran's radical assessments of human nature and our potential for good, which results in total reliance on Amida. I feel like I should be doing more on my end. For example, when I am upset, sad, angry, impatient, etc., I just say the Nembutsu and try to move on the best I can. But I'm not assured enough yet to feel at ease doing this. As you stated in your video, Amida's embrace nullifies these anxieties. Is it simply a matter of time until we grow comfortable in the reality of this fact? In my readings thus far, I have been really moved and comforted by the idea of Amida. Putting all these things into practice has caused a lot of overthinking, however, and I feel as if I have hit a wall, which I am sure is only natural.
John said, I can understand the challenge of making a transition from a tradition that is rich with various practices to the simplicity of the Pure Land approach to the Dharma. Maybe it would help to view the Nembutsu teaching as pertaining to the aspiration for enlightenment, but not to view other areas of study or practice as being out of bounds if you are still drawn to them, so long as you don't view them as self-power methods geared toward the goal of attaining enlightenment. For example, if other practices that you have learned are effective in helping to address emotional states such as upset, sadness, and so on, why not take advantage of them? What Amida's embrace will help with is to reassure you that none of those practices is necessary to attain a state of non-retrogression, which has already been gifted to you as a result of your entrustment in the power of Amida's primal vow. That is perhaps the dynamic as to how anxieties can be nullified. What is important is that you seem to be continuing on a very meaningful spiritual path, and I feel confident it will lead to many benefits. I hope this helps a little.
Then Xavier said, Thanks, John. This did help put things into perspective. I thought a little bit about why I am so hung up on these other practices. Ideally, it would be practicing for the benefit of others. But after a little investigation, I've decided that my want to practice doesn't come from true altruism, but rather my attachments to concepts, like I mentioned earlier, as well as the self-inadequacy I've referenced before. I wasn't attempting other practices to help others, but to feel better about myself and intellectualize. I think because of this, once it came time to put things to actual practice, I grew uncomfortable and overwhelmed. I wasn't capable of actually doing those things, much as I'd like to imagine I could. My emotional and mental states remained distraught. I've just grown attached to complicated stuff for the sake of its complexity. Based off this, the humility and honesty in Shin Buddhism seems to be an antidote for me. Seeing as I often get tied up in what to do or not to do, I think I might spend some time exclusively reciting and see where that gets me. I've also started reading Shinran himself, and it's been really interesting. I knew Shinran was a monk and eventually returned to lay life, but I didn't know he struggled with higher practices too. Something that struck out to me is some dialogue Shinran quoted from Honen. To paraphrase, Honen basically stated that simple-minded people were assured of rebirth, but he questioned the rebirth of people who wanted to debate and intellectualize. I reflected on this a bit and wondered what it meant and how it pertains to faith and practice, as someone who overthinks a lot. I figured Honen and Shinran knew a lot more than me, and if they encouraged a simple practice, I should take their word on it. Whenever I have doubts, questions, concerns about myself or my practice, I'm just going to recite. The workings of Amida and rebirth are far beyond my comprehension, so trying to think my way to the Pure Land isn't going to get me anywhere. As easy and simple as it sounds, to give up my thinking, discerning mind is honestly pretty nerve-wracking. But we'll see how it goes. I hope it will open up my mind to a stronger, deeper sense of faith and entrusting.
John said, "You seem to have come to some important insights about motivation and the dynamics of attachment. I also once imagined I could accomplish the ideal practices of a bodhisattva. The realization that I could not is what led me to an other power spiritual path. The Shin narrative was, indeed, for me an antidote. It solved both the frustration associated with my practice failure as well as the tendency I had towards self-denigration. After all, Amida accepts me just as I am."
Xavier then said, "Yes, I also think I've come to an important insight. I've been doing exclusive recitations for a few days now. I have given myself permission to trust Amida. I've realized I'm never going to convince my thinking mind of anything because it's too wrapped up in ego, attachment, etc. When I first encountered the Pure Land Dharma, I thought trust was some sort of intellectual end result. I've realized it is actually the opposite. In relinquishing intellect, I've given myself over to the deeper experiential level of Dharma available to me as someone of low capacity for practice. Like I said, it took a lot of studying and several detours to get to this point. I think spending time in more rigorous schools fostered trust in Buddhism in general. Learning Mahayana as a whole taught me that, at least as a concept, Amida and the Pure Land could be possible. It also taught me that the Mahayana practices require a commitment I don't have, at least in this life with my current causes and conditions. I still hold those schools in high regard for their dedication and effort, but there is no sense in trying to force a square peg into a round hole. No matter which way I cut it, I had to admit those paths weren't meant for me beyond distant admiration and appreciation. Even this experience further solidifies Shakyamuni Buddha's genius, foresight in diversifying his teachings and the universality of the Dharma. While this is partially relieving, it's also pretty terrifying. But that sense of fear, too, I just let pass and return to my trust in Amida. Trusting through doubt fear, and insecurity, I feel safe on an existential level, knowing that Amida foresaw all of this when he made his vows and expects me to feel this way. I can't really explain it in words, but it's as if the thinking, samsaric, egotistical part of me is terrified, while a deeper part of me has found peace in spite of that. Just entertaining the possibility that this really might be my last life in samsara, my mindset is already shifting dramatically. I am much more appreciative of everything around me and less worried about day-to-day concerns. I view human beings with more compassion, knowing that after this life I will be able to come back and help them. Bodhicitta, something I could never muster in previous practices, feels closer now. I also feel a lot easier on myself. I love myself, who I am, my body, my personality. If I am going to take this Dharma literally, it means that from beginningless time, life after life, all my karma and merit has led to this life, so that I may encounter the Dharma in this current incarnation. How could I not appreciate myself in light of that? I hope that my testimony will act as proof for others that the Pure Land Way is valid and transformative. Years ago, when I first dabbled in studying and said the Nembutsu, I never thought I would end up here one day. It is true that once you make contact with Amida, you are never abandoned. Namo Amida Butsu.
John said, "Your testimony is deeply moving. Your perspective has really evolved in the direction of entrustment and away from a self-power orientation, having realized that the latter is not a feasible route. It is for ordinary beings such as you and I that Amida made the vow. I am so happy that this direction has resulted in positive day-to-day effects in your life. As for recitations, I assume you know that none are necessary once entrustment is established, and that our saying the Nembutsu is as an expression of gratitude for the gift we have been given."
Then Xavier commented, Shinran states that Shakyamuni's chief motive for teaching the Dharma was to reveal Amida's vow. If that is the case, the 84,000 other Dharma doors are preliminary gates for the one gate that is Amida's vow. Given the culmination of the Mahayana in Amida's vow, does that nullify the preliminary teachings' importance, and by extension, other Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, and Pure Lands? Or could it be looked at as a preview of the practices which await us in the Pure Land? And Shakyamuni gave us the Dharma in all of its scope to prepare us for acceptance of Amida's grace. I still appreciate teachers and thinkers from schools I studied before. I would feel disrespectful if I regarded their efforts in vain. I would be curious as to your opinion on this, given you also respect self-power teachings for their own merit. I suspect my perspective is either too narrow and or too prideful. Given what a great undertaking it is to actually achieve enlightenment, I could see how students of other schools get as far as they can by their own self-power, but other power is the necessary component to tip over into enlightenment. I guess this is just another fact of the vow, which is beyond our understanding, and testimony to Amida's great storehouse of merit which he shares with all beings. Again and again, I go back to the old adage about the Pure Land being the easy path, but the most difficult to accept.
John said, "The issues you raise are good ones, my friend. Shinran's time was filled with wars and famines and natural disasters, and was, of course, many hundreds of years removed from direct access to Shakyamuni Buddha or any of the disciples who followed him in the few years after his parinirvana. It was that combination that led Shinran and other Buddhists in the 13th century Japanese culture to believe in the concept of Mappo, that no one in their time and place really had the capability to become a fully enlightened Buddha. In any case, I view the matter in broad terms. Namely, I think there is great value in all the 84,000 teachings within the Buddha Dharma, insofar as any particular teaching meets the spiritual needs of any particular person or group of persons. I do, however, think that even in our era, to become fully enlightened via self-power teachings is extraordinarily difficult, if not impossible. Thus, I think that many who pursue such a path realize sooner or later that they are dependent on other power, in the form of the sustaining power of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas generally, or in the form of Amida and his emanations more specifically.
Then Xavier said, I was unaware of the larger historical context Shinran was living in. I have one more question, for fun, because it's been on my mind. As I've continued reading Shinran, he mentions that Amida is an emanation of the Dharmakaya, and also calls him the Supreme or Ultimate or Eternal Buddha. I have a hunch these two concepts are related. At first, from my humanized viewpoint, I got offended on Shakyamuni's behalf. How could one Buddha be better than another? Furthermore, Shinran goes as far as to say Shakyamuni is an emanation of Amida, unless I read it wrong. Could this be another matter of skillful means, and Shinran is using his unique rhetoric to reveal something? In my pondering, I've got this loose sequence in my head. The Dharmakaya is the base of enlightened activity. All Buddhas share the same base. Enter Shinran. Amida is the Supreme Buddha as an object of reverence and on the merit of his vows. Sharing that base, Shakyamuni is an emanation of Amida, the personified Dharmakaya. Once we reach the Pure Land, we take on enlightened activity and also become one with the Dharmakaya/Amida.
John said, As for emanations, I think you are on the right track. I would encourage you to take a look at the Trikaya, or three-body doctrine, within Buddhism. I may have covered it in a video. The theory has it that there is the Dharmakaya, or truth body, or law body, that is beyond all words and concepts. It cannot be characterized at all from the limited perspective of human language or describable attributes. The way I think of it is that the other two bodies emanate from it, namely the Nirmanakaya, which is the form body or the manifestation of Buddhahood in human form, such as in the case of Shakyamuni. And the third is the Sambhogakaya, or bliss body, which I think of as the spiritual or cosmic level, consisting of all the myriad Buddhas and Bodhisattvas whom we read about in the sutras. From a Shin Buddhist perspective, Amida is supreme, and all the others are emanations from him. 2 more points. Yes, you are right, in my opinion, about all of this relating to the notion of skillful means. This technique is the key teaching in Chapter 2 of the Lotus Sutra, and is reinforced throughout the text. You will also note that the second major teaching in the Lotus is in Chapter 16, where it is revealed that the life of the Buddha is eternal. To my mind, this is in effect Amida, though that view of mine is rather idiosyncratic.
Hard is it to be born into human life. Now we are living it. Difficult it is to hear the teachings of the Blessed One. Now we hear it. If we do not realize the truth in this life, when will it be realized?